We're deep diving into the philosophy of Naval Ravikant, the best of Naval's quotes, the top 15 for this episode. Ready for this?
Ready for it?
Desire is a contract you make with yourself. Be unhappy until you get what you want.
Definition of happiness is when you are okay with what's going on. You don't have any additional desire.
Naval says escape competition through authenticity.
Nobody can be Pavel better than Pavel.
In that podcast with Chris Williamson, he says that opportunities are abound. We must ride on an opportunity.
He says something along the line of, there's only 4 problems to solve. Money, physical health, mental health, and then 4th, house full of love.
Play long-term games with long-term people.
This is a 90-year, 80-year game. And the only thing is what game you want to play and who do you want to play it with.
Seek wealth, not money or status. Wealth is having assets that earn while you sleep. Agree or disagree?
I highly agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons I can afford to have this conversation.
But what is the ultimate game that Naval is playing? I'll be honest with you, I don't know. Whereas Marcus Aurelius, born in 121 AD, Roman emperor, the greatest empire of its time, he came to the conclusion, this game of life that has a defined endpoint is to seek pleasure of up above.
And I think perhaps if Naval really sees some of this, can actually respond himself and say, what is the ultimate purpose? What is the ultimate game he's playing?
You've just seen the teaser for the first episode. We had an amazing conversation with Pavel Abdur-Rahman. Pavel led IBM's global practice on data strategy and hybrid cloud. He's a teacher at the Smith School of Business at Queen's University, and he's also the chair for IEEE's Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. But the reality is that no introduction does justice to the conversation that we had with him. So without any further ado, let's go to the episode. For those of you who don't know, Naval Ravikant is known both as a successful angel investor, also the mind behind AngelList. His quotes have been shared millions of times online, and for many people, he has shaped the way they think about creating wealth, making decisions, and even innovation in fields like AI and Web3. I know you've been very inspired by Naval's philosophy. Which ones of his ideas have influenced your work, your perspective, your thinking, and your approach?
One thing that comes to top of mind, he just helped me think about brutal prioritization and being very sort of explicit. So example, there's only 4 problems to solve: money, health, both physical health and mental health. And then 4th, which probably is the most complicated, house full of love. Being explicitly saying at age 30 or 25 that I'm just going to solve my money problem so that I don't have a money problem. It's a very good directional guidance, right? Because you can be very explicit about it, knowing that there are other things that's important.
Brutal prioritization. I was smiling when you said that because Rafi and I discuss this a lot. You know, when you're working in a startup environment, it sounds easy when you say it. Obviously, everyone should be prioritizing, right? It's just how they should do things. But it's so hard to do. But I want to deep dive now into Naval's wisdom. We've gone through the best of Naval's quotes, and we've shortlisted the top 15 for this episode. So we're going to go through each one of them. All right, number 1. Desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want.
I heard him speak about happiness recently. What is definition of happiness is when you are okay with what's going on. You don't have any additional desire. So perhaps when you say that comment, that if you have, the notion is you have desires that drives dopamine, that drives a fulfillment. That's a cycle. And then once you're fulfilled, then you're unfulfilled. There's a drop. And then you have to change the game to something else. So what he's perhaps referring to, and when I hear it, is that if you have a desire, make sure you accept it, because it's going to drive your dopamine and your fulfillment cycle. And you have to accept that you may not be happy until you're fulfilled.
Yeah.
So make sure you accept or control your desires well, because once you have accepted it, now you're on this cycle.
Getting something that you want is a process. I think there's an understanding that process can be a painful one. It's something that is artificially constructed. I think if you look at the greats, you look at like Kobe over here that we put in, there's an understanding that no pain, no gain. The understanding that to gain something, there's going to be pain, and be willingly put yourself in that position to be pained, understanding that there's a gratification that will come from the outcome.
Go through that process. That's when you develop the appreciation, because We were with the Fasset team in Pakistan. And the thought experiment we did was we asked the group, there were about 25 of us around the table, and we said, what has been the most memorable moment for you since you joined the company? And every single example that the team shared were stories of struggle. It was about when they wanted to get to something, there were hurdles, there were bugs, there were challenges, there were blockers. They worked hard to overcome them. And somehow those were the most memorable times that they'd spent at the company.
Is a shared struggle towards a bigger goal. And if you think of it in our personal lives, when we went through schooling, some of the friends and the relationship that we have is because we all went through some type of shared goal, a shared struggle. Similarly for military, like military is another example of when you go through struggle for some type of shared goal or winning a championship, the bond between players become much stronger because they have gone through the struggle. So the struggle is necessary. Same thing with, partners, life partners or business partners. Without the struggle, the relationship doesn't seem to get stronger.
Yeah. And I think that is the reason why people who play competitive sports actually do well in their careers as well.
Ronaldo says all the time that he's like, I gotta wake up, I gotta go to the gym. It's not fun, but it's part of the process. I mean, all the greats like LeBron James at 40 years old, it's insane. I mean, 20 years of just sheer dedication. But what comes to mind from all this is that if you look at the greats or even our own parents, no one ever tells their grandkids that, hey, I had a lot of fun after I got promoted and I got a rise in salary. No one ever says that, man. Everyone's like, when I was your age, I used to walk 5 miles to school, right? People always remember that and actually cherish the struggle. And it's just incredible how that kind of human psyche element plays a role.
Number 2, earn with your mind, not with your time.
That was a very good reminder for me to make some changes to my career because I was a consultant. And as you know, consultants sell their time.
I've been there, done that.
Which has been a great experience because I think you become a much more active learning machine because you're thrown in a lot of different environment, including geographical situation and sectors and problems and so on. But when I think of that, that's when I learned about leverage, right? Whether it's, your labor or your time is at the bottom of your leverage. There's nothing wrong with making money with that because if that's the only card you're given, you should monetize your time. But there's a ladder to it. The next step of leverage, in addition to time, would be capital, because capital can be scaled and levered as well. One of the reasons I explored real estate or any other investments is because you can deploy capital without your time being a requirement. And then the third, and perhaps what the modern world today is technology and software and code and media and this entire realm of digital world is also highly scalable, right? Like we're having this conversation. Hopefully somebody in Morocco and somebody in Indonesia can hear us talking sitting in Dubai, and hopefully it'll be beneficial to them. I learned how to move into and play in multiple layers of the leverage stack. And then ideally, if you can combine all three, then you should have a scalable way to create wealth.
You talk about leverage, you talk about technology. The thing that comes to my mind is AI. I'm a marketeer, and if I think about how much that has completely changed my career and marketing overall, it has been unfathomable. You're an expert in AI. How do you feel about that?
Obviously, AI is one of the biggest topic today. But when I went to school and I tried to understand what it is, I had an operational research background. That was my undergrad, and then I studied master's in AI. My summary from that entire experience is the following. Sounds a little bit complicated, but I hope it resonates. An error corrector correcting the correction machine. Before we talk about AI, that's who we are, right? We are an error corrector correcting the correction process, right? What's the struggle between humans and AI? Well, AI just don't have any ego about it. The entire notion is it's a learning machine that's continuously correcting itself without being worried about ego, power, leverage, positioning, feelings, emotions, right? And that's the major difference that I find between an AI and a human being, because we get caught up in some of that emotions, right? We don't necessarily want to acknowledge our mistakes or correct our behaviors and so on. That's how I think of AI. And when I think about when would AI versus human in certain areas, when would they do better? in workflows and processes where there's no room for judgment or ego, right? So if you think about a robot taxi, well, we don't need any emotions involved, right? It's just an error corrector correcting the correction process. It's just making sure it's continuously reducing this error. And we want that for a robot taxi. So that's why I like that example. In those cases, we should depend on the AI. But in many, many other cases, which we can discuss, when it's about judgment, it's not just about error correction.
That's where you need the emotion and the human factor.
That's when you need humans, what humans are supposed to be great at, right? It's our judgment.
Quote number 3 from Naval: no one gets rich renting out their time.
Renting out your time at the highest rate is also very okay to live a comfortable life and support your family. If you're renting yourself at $15 an hour, but there are also people that are renting themselves, as an expert lawyer, example, $1,000, $2,000 an hour. There's no shame in doing so because you can support your family. If I was 22 today, I probably started building assets in different way that I could, whether it's stocks and bonds, and I would have probably even taken even more aggressive approach on this leverage stack and how I could have assets that combines labor, capital, and technology.
How do you do each one of those at 22? If you started off today?
Start owning digital assets if you have a very small capital base, because that's the whole power of digital asset technology, right? Like crypto and blockchain are enabling anybody, anywhere, to buy a piece of asset based on the capital they have available. If you have no access to stocks and bonds, you have no access to real estate, you're 22, perhaps very limited capital, well, you can start with what blockchain and crypto has to offer to the world, right? And that should grow over time. And then you can continue to grow that portfolio in addition to some of the other asset classes once you have some more capital.
And I think one more thing that people can do is that even if you don't have your own business, there are other ways that you can actually compound and build wealth over time. And these could include, for example, investing in other businesses. And one thing that a lot of people have started looking into right now is content creation. Technically, that is running your own business as well, but also a way for you to actually build wealth over time.
Yeah, very true.
So that brings me to Naval's fourth quote: escape competition through authenticity. Now, before you react to this, I have to say, I'm not sure I agree with this 100%. I think everyone wants to be authentic, but then there are so many of us out there. So I don't know how practical this advice is. How do you feel about this?
My takeaway from that is nobody can be Pavel better than Pavel, which is true. Then the question is there any value the world attributes to Pavel, right? So first thing, nobody can be Pavel better than Pavel. Once you acknowledge that, well, then what's the value Pavel has to offer to the world that the world acknowledges?
And let me break that down. If you're living a unauthentic life, you are living a lie. And if you're living a lie, you are actually depriving the world from seeing who you are. And if you're depriving the world of seeing who you are, you yourself don't know what you could have delivered, because the world will go right past the real, unauthentic you. You cannot be the best version of yourself. So if Pavel is not Pavel, and if Pavel's living a lie, the world will not see Pavel, and Pavel will deprive himself of doing the best that he could have done.
And then the second element to your point is that what is it that's play or fun for me, but work for somebody else? That's a craft, and that might take decades, because once one figure that out, that's when the world will attribute the value, and the two in combination, right? Nobody can be Pavel better than Pavel. And whatever Pavel is valued for, it's fun for him, it's work for others, right? So those two combination probably difficult for competition to catch up.
I
No?
hear you. So I'm smiling because what you just touched upon goes very closely with the fifth quote from Naval. So Naval says, get rich by giving society what it wants, but does not know yet how to get.
You should be you. But there's a trade here, right? The trade is, what does the world attribute as value to keep each of us in check? And we're in the marketplace, global marketplace with digital technology, where anybody with skills and talent can bring that value creation into the world.
Peter Thiel has a great saying: what is one truth that you hold as a truth that no one else does? Steve Jobs makes it even simpler. The world didn't need an iPhone. According to Steve Jobs, people didn't want a physical touchpad on their iPhone. He didn't wait for customers to Customers said that we need it. Steve Jobs like, no, you don't. I don't care what the data says.
And to be fair, if you'd done market research, probably wouldn't have come up with
Steve
an
Jobs would have
iPhone.
been wrong. Yeah, absolutely. Sam Altman right now is getting rich by giving society what it wants. So that recent Studio Ghibli phenomena, is that ethical?
These are a big topic, but I would just say this conversation reminds me of conversations you and I had with lots of other global experts around nuclear, how nuclear has been so critical for our energy needs. Nuclear can also end all of us. I think as AI continues to develop, I think we're still in a very early stage. We are going to bump into many, many situations where we have to pause and rethink. And then, by the way, the world is still in one place, right? We don't have a nuclear war around the world. It could have happened in the last 50 years. So we're able to contain it. And I'm in general positive and optimistic about the overall approach. And I'm skeptical about small things, right? I think in general, we'll figure this out. That's what I would react to, Rafi. But every day there's things will appear. And I hope governments and markets correct itself to contain AI for the humanity's goals.
Quote number 6 from Naval: play long-term games with long-term people.
This is a 90-year, 80-year game that we're all playing. Eventually, all the monetary stuff are just Chuck E. Cheese tokens, right? It means nothing really, right? You can't take it with you. So the only thing is what game you want to play and who do you want to play it with, right? Because that is a golden thread goes throughout your life. So to me, I've always been very, very careful about not what we're gonna actually end up doing, but who we are and how's the relationship. Because if there's an alignment there, and then we enjoy each other's company, then opportunities will come and we will figure out where to play, where not to play, and when to pause a play. All of those things will work itself out.
Val says play long-term games with long-term people. I don't think even he intends what I would intend from this quote. And Pavel and I have had this discussion just the other day, which is that if it comes to me, I would only love to play the long-term game with the long-term people. And what that means is that what is the long-term game in life? And if you can define the right long-term game, then it becomes very clear who are the long-term people. If the long-term game, in our case, to seek the pleasure of God, then it becomes very clear who the long-term people you wanted to do that game with, right? And, Paul and I have been having this discussion on, Marcus Aurelius versus Naval. What is the ultimate game that Naval is playing? I'll be honest with you, I don't know. Whereas Marcus Aurelius, born in 121 AD, 2,000 years ago, Roman emperor, the greatest empire of its time. He went straight to the top, even though he's out from the royal family. He came to the conclusion at age 40 years old, after he saw everything from the top of human society, that ultimately this game of life that has a defined endpoint is to seek the pleasure of up above.
And I think perhaps if Naval really sees some of this, can actually respond himself and say, what is the ultimate purpose? What is the ultimate game he's playing?
You could argue that, his take could possibly be about happiness and success, and the fact that, he considers himself to be very successful. If I were given a chance 1,000 times, 999 times, I would still be successful. And for him, maybe that's the end goal.
There's another controversial speaker, Jordan Peterson. He's a psychotherapist, and as he seems to be, in his later years, he has changed opinion on a lot of things, and he did, resort to Christianity and religion as a fundamental purpose and framework. That was not Jordan Peterson's material even 10, 15, 20 years ago. Right. So we'll see. We're all dynamic systems, we're allowed to continue to evolve.
So I'm just going to switch gears, man. Naval's 7th quote: if you can't decide, the answer is no. Pavel has a great Pavelism on this
Oh boy.
that we have echoed in the halls of Fasset for the longest time. And it comes down to, he says that if a manager doesn't say no, and Pavel can do it better, that means he doesn't have enough on his plate. Can you give the exact Pavelism quote here?
I mean, in general, it's probably comes from consulting workload. You always want to give work to the most busy people. You want to front load, and Because we're always estimating, right, how much workload you can absorb. 80% of the time when we feel we're physically exhausted, there are arguments that you still have 80% in the tank. So one way to challenge team members, each other, is to ask to take on more loads until you're violently disagreeing. That means you have more than 80% in the tank.
How do you prevent the cycle of the best people getting the most amount of work, getting really busy, doing a good job, getting more work, getting even busier, and becoming a vicious cycle?
I mean, remember the concept of you don't want to be stay in the business, you want to be out of the business. That can also apply to the top performer.
What does that really mean?
What the top performer should be figuring out that I'm carrying a lot of load and I would have team members, I know how to delegate and I don't relegate.
It's another Pavelism right there. For the camera, we need to start marking Pavelisms as well.
This notion of delegation versus relegation, right? I mean, that's basically, if you look at a video game, you're like this machine or like, this sort of soldier that's getting shot left, right, and then you go get a win or something and you're charged, right? So the top performer is continuously sought after for more workload, and he or she needs to figure out how to continue to build a team around them because nobody can do anything by themselves, and know when to delegate and when to do something by themselves. And that is a process because eventually that person can start their own company and then figures out their own product market fit and figures out how not to be in the business, as an example. So these are all sort of building blocks of how to continue to grow and develop.
Was there a time in your life, I'm sure there must have been many, when you found it really hard to say no?
I think this is a skill. In fact, I would say I'm still working on it, but my family member says I got very good at it. In general, it's a no all the time. I think Naval's recent terminology, and he frames it as holistic selfishness. I think Rafi has some allergic reaction to it. And I wonder it's because Naval in his 50, I'm in my 40s, and Rafi is still in his 30s. He's still experimenting different things. But as we certainly age, it's definitely becoming very clear to me what's important and what's not. That was not simple for me in earlier years. And I'm quite convinced of it, and I don't need an external validation. So hence, I'm very comfortable saying no, even if it comes to my family members.
You know who's another person who says no really well? Rafi says no to most of the meeting invites that I send him. And I think he's very particular about where he spends his time.
And I agree with Pavel and Naval. Saying no has been paramount to the last few years of how I've run this. Ever since Pavel basically is like, you got to brutally prioritize, you got to say no, you got to free up. That's on the mechanics day to day, which once again, I continue to stress that I can't agree with Naval more when it comes to how to build a business and be successful from a materialistic standpoint, which I think is fundamental. But it's that X and Y axis that Pavel used to quote a lot. So I think on the X axis of materialism, running a business, running a startup, growth in one's career, saying no is absolutely fundamental. It has changed the way I have run this place. But on the Y axis of, for lack of a better word, the unseen, whether you call it nature, whether you call it baraka, there is a innate magnetic force and to being altruistic. And once again, I'm currently fascinated by Marcus Aurelius, but he says it himself. He's like, when a stimulus comes our way and when we prioritize nature over ourselves, there's an innate happiness that comes with it. And, if you look at the instinct of a mother and a child, you'll see it every time that our mothers themselves have sacrificed many things for our happiness because that directly correlates to their happiness, even though the short term may be painful. So when Naval says
Holistic
unselfish,
selfishness, I think you make a great point, and I think it's the same sort of notion of macro and micro, right? So in macro, you can be unselfish, and in micro, perhaps you should be selfish when you know what you are doing. Same thing applies to, like, for example, optimism versus skepticism. At a macro, you should be an optimist, but at a micro, you should be a skeptic.
I love that.
And
Right?
actually, Naval makes a great point recently in that podcast with Chris Williamson. He says that, we live in an age where opportunities are abound. We must ride on an opportunity and think that it can lead us to the promised land because of how the net benefits of the right opportunity can take you to far-flung places with regards to status, wealth, etc. But he also says, and this is exactly to your point, that when you choose to discern the opportunity, you have to be innately at the micro level very skeptical, because you can only go all in. He does say go all in, right? Which is another interesting thing that Naval says, is that there's a lot of opportunities in front of you. You have to be an optimistic, knowing that in today's age, if you pick the right opportunity, you can, just by the sheer way the economy and society works, you can be at the top of society. But to determine that right opportunity, when each opportunity comes your way, you have to discern it within healthy level of skepticism. And the point that he makes, and he quotes a secretary theorem, which we were speaking about. Secretary theorem is that if you're going to interview for a secretary and you have the ability to choose at any point as you interview, at which point do you stop assuming that you'll get the optimal choice? And this is kind of where this whole conundrum comes about. By the way, apparently, according to mathematicians, that 37%. But where this plays out well is when you're picking a life partner, right? Some people will go 10, 15, 20 years. They don't know who to pick to get married. On the grand scheme of things, you got to be able to understand that by picking that life partner, you're going to go places that you couldn't have gone. But at the individual female perspective, the individual opposite gender perspective, you got to be a little bit skeptical.
I like the science part of it. I'm personally a gut feel person with a lot of these choices. I like the angle about balancing optimism and skepticism, because a lot of people that I've come across in my career, they struggle with that. They struggle to figure out the right balance between those two. And the framing that I like a lot is always be externally confident, but internally questioning things and never complacent. So that's another way to kind of look at
It's
it.
this push and pull, continuous struggle. That's a general theme of life.
So that brings us to my favorite quote from Naval. Specific knowledge is found by pursuing your genuine curiosity and passion, not by chasing money. Something that I feel very passionately about.
If you go back to the conversation we're having, right? We want to be us. We want to be the individual because that's the easiest. Nobody can compete with that. But at the same time, you got to find your specific knowledge the world puts value to. At the combination of those two things, a very powerful way to live life.
And Rafi, you talk about this concept of a realized goal or mission and an unrealized goal. I think that ties in really well with this quote as well, which is about curiosity and passion.
That's a Pavlism as well. He had that. He was reading the book, was the second mountain concept that,
Yeah, the
that
second
Pavel
mountain.
used to push hard in 2022. It's like, what is your second mountain? He had already climbed the first mountain at that point in time. I was on my first mountain, but he's already telling me, like, look at your second mountain. And the second mountain is that. It's like, what is the overarching goal? And how do you keep that theme in your day-to-day? And for me, this comes down to one thing, which I say a lot these days, which is hard right turns, right? Be willing to take hard right turns. The way you can do a hard right turn is that when you take a hard right turn, you're doing it with full gusto, full curiosity, full desire to get to the bottom of whatever you're doing, knowing that if you do, you can be number one or you can be at the top.
What's the hard right turn that you took?
Man, I've taken a lot of hard right turns, man. Gone out of school a couple of times to take hard right turns into, we met in Amman, Jordan. I moved from Los Angeles, California.
That's a hard right turn.
That's a hard right turn, man. And then I chose the decision that I'm going to stop studying Arabic and take a hard right turn into Baghdad and work for the UN. It's a hard right turn. I took a real nice hard right turn into Doha, right? So there are some good hard right turns. There's some tough hard right turns. But, I think there are some examples even that, I think in our cultures, it's not rewarded to think about hard right turns. We're siloed into thinking that is doctor, engineer, lawyer. You go through that career. None of that includes leverage that we've been talking about. And then you find yourself renting out your time for 50, 60 years. That's kind of the whole purpose of this whole thing, that in this time and age, you can take a hard right turn.
So, number 9 from Naval, the most important skill for getting rich is becoming a perpetual learner.
Particularly if we want to compete with AI, right? It's a learning machine without an ego. It's an adventurous life when you focus on becoming a learning machine, and whatever that happens to be. Right now I'm struggling to learn Spanish. I have no idea how that will help me, but it's a concept that I'm drawn to. It's actually also a necessary approach for a healthy, long, high quality life. If you look at people who are living very good quality life in their 80s and 90s, they seem to continuously move to a new location. They seem to continuously learn new language, and they seem to continuously meet and build new relationships. And the reward for that is you have a very high quality, healthy life.
And that's great for creativity, by the way.
Of
So
course.
research shows that if you move places, if you immerse yourself in different cultures, it actually drives and boosts your creativity. But one of the things that I've learned about learning is that it's as important to unlearn things as it is to learn things. So, for example, one of the hard right turns that I took was when I moved from a very traditional beverage company into tech. And for me, probably the harder part was unlearning some of the things that I'd learned earlier before I could learn how things work.
We're kind of saying the same thing, but in a different way. So to me, if we're just learning and continually correcting our error, unlearning is actually happening without me even worried about it. It might have more energy behind it because, when nobody wants to get off the first mountain. Nobody wants to give up. And it actually comes from evolution, right? Nobody wants to lose what they have acquired because it's very difficult. So the notion of unlearning might be overwhelming for people. Another way to look at it is I just continue to learn and I correct my errors.
It's funny. It just reminds me when Pavel joined in 2022 Fasset, bro. I mean, 13, 14 hours a day. At any point in the day, I'd get a WhatsApp. He's like, hey, I just read this article on crypto, and I just saw this quote on blockchain. I just learned this about Nigeria. This is what's happening in Bangladesh, and he started putting this little makeshift Google Doc together where he's like, remember that doc you put together? Like this is there, that's there, all the learnings, rapid succession, all hours of the night. And what's interesting is that it all culminated in a very deep understanding of what we were doing. Remember that slide that you put together about L2J chain? Basically, man, with the understanding of 2022,
What's L2J?
L2J is L2J chain, Lagos to Jakarta, which was version 1 of what we now say Morocco to Malaysia. There was a chain, there was a platform, there were these tokenized asset classes. It's exactly where we are today.
So that's where the idea germinated.
And you know what happened? It had everything exactly the way we have it today. Not exaggerating. We then go on with our board. And I hope they hear this. We go on our board, me and Pablo, we're pumped. We figured this out. We figured out the immaculate business model that includes a blockchain, an exchange, real world assets, everything. We get on there. This guy sits on our board, our biggest investor. Within 5 minutes, he's like, this is the most terrible thing I've ever seen in my life. You guys have no idea what you're doing. Pablo came from IBM, so I don't know how he put his ego aside if we're talking about ego. I'm just like, whoa, man. And these guys are blockchain experts as well. And the funny thing is, we kept at it, and it's exactly what he had discovered with this error correcting machine thing that you were saying, bro. And it's incredible.
How do you go from there, where you present an idea to your board, you get shot down in 5 minutes, and today you're actually executing that same idea?
And you got to believe something that no one else believes. Because if you do this error correcting because my board's not doing this constant error
You don't have
correcting
the special
process.
knowledge
That's
that
right.
Rafi and the team has built hours of learning and figuring out on the ground.
So that's what you mean when you're talking about a learning machine without ego.
And it's okay if they didn't get it. The question is, the market will let you know if you are on the right track or not, right? So the good news is the market let Fasset and Rafi and the team and Daniel know that you guys are on the right track because they kept supporting it.
And this comes nice segue to quote number 10 by Naval. Couldn't come at a better time. He says, embrace accountability and take business risks under your own name. Society will reward you with responsibility, equity, and eventually wealth.
You cannot hide behind a PowerPoint. You cannot hide behind a logo. At the end of the day, relationships, businesses are done. We were just talking about some large transactions that recently happened in Canada where 4 or 5 individuals needed to bet on each other to put their political capital as well as career on the line to make a large transaction work. That's not going to happen if you don't own what you're saying. And you're kind of, you're using your reputation, right? I mean, at the end of the day, all we have is reputation, right? Because people remember what you have said, what you have done, how did you do it, right? So when you want to push forward an idea, you're putting your reputation on the line because you're kind of all in on that, right? You're risking the most sought after asset that you have, particularly in the digital world where, something happens in this part of the world, somebody will figure that out next morning in the other part of the world. You can't really hide. So when you're putting your reputation on the line to push something forward, you're very sincere about it. And once you're right, the world will reward you for it.
You said something really interesting. You said your reputation is all you have. What will Pavel's reputation be 20 years from now?
That's, complicated and big. I'm still sort of sorting that out. But in general, we're talking about Naval, we're talking about all the different problems that he thinks we should solve. I want to support my family with whatever they require. So I'm there for my family. I want to contribute to a bigger goal that has, long lasting effect on others. And then I want to live a high quality life. Those are big, ambitious goals for me. There's a lot of struggles associated with it. But I think in this table, all of us are very comfortable making hard turns and go from 0 to 1 and 1 to zeros and climb different mountains. To achieve those goals, I may have to climb lots of mountains to get there.
Now, the next one is a really good one. So, also one of my favorites. Quote number 11 from Naval: luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
I guess it's the world recognizing all the hard work you put in, right? And to outsider, it looks random.
But do you not think that being at the right place at the right time is important as well?
Yeah, but you have no control over that, right? If all the hard work you put in to be you and you just happen to be in a situation where the world is attributing the value to you, I could sit from this and just say, oh, Saad just got lucky that day. That's because I don't have the full picture. For you, you've been preparing for it for all your life. And you've been you and you've been testing the world. And that was the moment when the world acknowledged your real value.
And my long-term soccer coach as a kid used to always say, and it was mainly just to me. I'm not the most skilled guy, but for 5-6 years, he would just hammer, Rafi, you got to put yourself in position to get lucky. You got to put yourself in position to get lucky. And he just kept on saying it. And I think sports here is a great example. Like when we're playing tennis, when we're playing volleyball, when you play soccer, just move your feet and constantly put yourself in the right position based on various characteristics of that particular game, of your opponent, of your strengths, hiding your weaknesses, complementing your team. And you take all of those and you just constantly put yourself in that right position, right position, right position. You're going to give yourself many chances to smash it. And it's no different, man. It's no different to the real world.
Yeah, you're increasing your probability by being in the right environment.
By being prepared.
Of course, and then also the right environment. Anybody listening to this in general, being prepared, we have full control over it. That's table stakes. You must be prepared. Then what we're talking, hopefully you're in the right environment where you get lucky, right? And we rather be lucky than good, always. But being prepared is table stake.
And Naval makes, in that same podcast with Chris Williams, he makes a great point as well. He's like, where you are, where you choose to be and to live and to work is such a fundamentally game-changing vector that you put yourself on, because where you move, you will most likely meet your partners, your spouse, your friends, your future business, partners as well. But we spend such little time thinking about the environment that we can all of a sudden pack our bags and move to the next environment. This one's a well-known quote by Naval. Your network is your net worth.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarity in some of these things, right? Long-term game with long-term people. Because the world is a digital village, people can be connected anywhere in the world. Your ability to connect dots with all the different types of leverage, your time, your capital, your technology, you can make big impact. So your network can create if you connected the dots properly.
Is there a specific instance when you felt like that's really, really worked well for you?
Very humble beginning growing up in Dhaka, right? To Toronto, to all these different opportunities that I've been blessed with. It's all it's not through family relations, just one thing leading to another and continuously trying to relate, build a relationship and find opportunities. And sometimes that works, sometimes it didn't work. We should not think about any of these nodes of our network as a static systems. They're all dynamic. They're all evolving in their own ways. I recently had a reflection where one of those senior partners that made a huge influence in my life in my early career, I used to, look up to him for a lot of reasons. And recently, I saw him in a different light. And I need to remind myself that, we don't need to put any of our network in a pedestal, right? We just need to ensure and acknowledge where they are and how they're attributing to our goals and how we're attributing their goals. And it's okay that different people are evolving, growing at a different speed and pace, right? They're still, valuable to the overall concept.
And it's always symbiotic where, while a person in your network could be adding value to you, but it could also be the other way around.
What's built into this quote is that your network is your net worth, but it's not just who you know, it's how well do they know you. And it just comes down to, you can have that phone number of that prime minister and you can call that guy, but will he pick up your phone or not? Because if you get to a prime ministership, whole world's calling you, man. Like when Trump comes into the office, I used to remember guys work for a prime minister as well. And after I left the prime minister's office, no one wants to pick up my phone anymore. Many years went by, no one wants to pick up my phone. But when I was there, man, people pick up on the first ring, and they're picking up on someone else's reputation. It's how you give, how you pay it forward, what kind of value can you bring that no one else can. It all goes into the quality of your network, not just how many people are on it.
And you mentioned the Prime Minister's office. So you were working at the UAE Prime Minister's office. Tell us a bit about that.
Paul was actually a great example. I haven't talked to Paul for 10 years. I may have sent him some WhatsApp message that he didn't respond to. But the moment I get in the Prime Minister's office, I come up to 10 years, the man picks up on my first ring. I'm like, Pavel, what about those? That didn't actually happen. I'm just kidding. But that's kind of the effect of it, right? That at that point, they don't care who Rafi is. They care about, who he's representing.
What were you doing there?
I was trying to bring experts around the table. And that was one of there was a previous quote that, when you build on your own brand and your own reputation, success comes from that. I think what I learned there is that obviously His Highness's vision for Dubai has an incredible effect and an incredible convening power, and an incredible power to close opportunities, because people can see that this man has delivered for decades, and he's 5, 6, 7, 15 steps ahead of the game. All you have to your name is your reputation, and you just got to just continue to mind that.
At the end of the day, it's not who you know or do they know you, but also what do you have to say that is valuable today. I would say probably in the earlier years, in my teenager years, early 20s, it was just the network was the goal. But now I would say I'm not really interested to go to Wine and Cheese and meet some new people, although maybe I should. But now it's more like, what is it I want to say that is useful and valuable? And so it's this continuous push and pull of knowing people, but at the same time, you're not spending all your time just knowing people. You also have to have an idea, a business, or a thought that is relevant.
And valuable.
And for that, you may have to take a step back from networking, right? So it's this continuous struggle.
So basically, you should only go for networking if you have value to offer.
I think it's a dynamic approach where, yes, continue to meet people, but at the same time, it's like, I think it's like sometimes some religious scholars are giving conferences everywhere but forgot to pray. So it's this notion of, you got to meet people at the same time. What is it you have to say that's useful? And that might take some individual time. You need to take some time off.
We're going to move on to Naval's 13th quote. This one actually, we talk about this a lot at Fasset. Seek wealth, not money or status. Wealth is having assets that earn while you sleep. Agree or disagree?
I highly agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons I can afford to have this conversation. That's probably a very big item that we should probably talk about and let our families and our friends or our community members be aware that, particularly in this current world, if you do not hold on to assets or you protect your capital and time and resources behind assets, the world will leave you behind. Inequality that we see in the world, one could argue asset ownership, a lack of that is really what that's going to accelerate, because the wage is just not going to keep up with the wealth creation that's happening. And if you do not possess assets, different types of assets, from crypto and digital technologies to stocks and bonds to real estate to private businesses and all sorts of things, it'll be very difficult to only depend on your wage. That quote is basically saying, ensure wealth creation comes from these different classes of assets, not just your wage or your time.
This quote basically summarizes the mission that we're on right now. Our belief at Facet is that every human being in the world, every individual has the fundamental right to build wealth. Shouldn't matter who you are, where you're from, what city you're living in, whether you're in New York, Toronto, LA, Karachi, Cairo. Every person has that same right to build wealth. Unfortunately, not everyone has access to all of those assets that you spoke about. And the mission that we're on is making sure that everyone gets access to those.
And even before that, not everyone knows that that should even be a goal, not a cultural element to think about. People in the culture say buy a house, but quite frankly, no one's saying, build your asset base and diversify the way. That's a modern concept.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I was a very big supporter and I joined Rafi and Daniel and Fasset is because of this mission.
Next quote, which I think is fantastic by Naval. If you're not getting rich by doing what you love, you're doing something wrong.
If I don't enjoy what I'm doing, I can't be all in. It just comes down to that. And think about anything we have accomplished in our lives. Doing something 50%, 30% energy just didn't yield any good outcome. Maybe it kept us busy, but it didn't yield any good outcome. So we do need to go all in.
But I would argue sometimes boring could mean more money. Some of the most boring businesses in the world actually make a lot of money.
Yeah, but it might be boring to you or me, but the owner of that business must love it.
What do you love? You went from being a top performer at IBM, being an expert on innovative technologies, on AI. You were playing basketball in Jordan. You're now working on affordable housing in Toronto. What do you truly love?
I think for me, it has always been trying to be in the middle of different Venn diagrams and take different directions. At the moment, if you ask me what are my three Venn diagrams, it is sort of this public policy and geopolitics because it has a lot to do with any commerce in any places, and then technology and all sorts of things. I'm finding a lot of natural energy to be in the intersection of these three things. And they can be small things to experimenting, could we build modular homes with robots in 3 to 6 months versus 5 to 7 years? Large scale, conversions of offices or hotels or so on to affordable housing rental stock, as an example. So, and then understanding the public policy that's driving both the federal, the provincial, and the municipal governments, and then the geopolitical tensions around tariffs because we are sourcing materials from different part of the world to do our work, and applying all type of technology, right? So I'm finding a lot of natural energy to be in that intersection.
How often does that change? Because that's very different from what you were doing a few years ago. The Venn diagram that you described for the Pavel 3 years from now, could that be different?
I hope it's different. I kind of want to live 15 to 20 Pavel life, and each version maybe 3 to 5 year cycles, because then I squeeze the max out of this 90-year cycle, right? So Venn diagrams has changed, and I hope it continues to change.
I really enjoy the feeling of getting out of my comfort zone every few years because I feel like that's when you're learning the most. You're put in situations where you have to just learn new skills, adapt to new environments, new cultures.
I'll give you this sort of phrasing that has been really resonating for me in the last couple of days, which is choose bravery over anxiety. You need to be able to add a different Venn diagram. Like, for example, let's say it's going to be learn Spanish. That's not an easy thing to do, right? So you need to be brave to embrace that world that I know nothing about. And I'm trading that bravery for anxiety because I don't have time to be anxious about my current Venn diagram, right? I'm just choosing bravery.
Last of all, quote number 15. You get paid in direct proportion to the difficulty of the problems you solve.
We talked about it. I mean, how difficult it is to build a startup. It's a big ambition, Facet, and you are successful in it. You should get rewarded for it because it's a very difficult problem. You've been at it for 6, 7, 8 years, and it might take even a couple more. And that's how difficult it is to make long-lasting impact. So I think we should take the bet of solving the most complex problem we're suited to solve. In my case, this sort of affordable housing platform is really what I'm focused on right now because I think it has a huge impact. Like most immigrants, when I moved to Canada, I lived in an affordable housing apartment, right? Because that's all we could afford. If you think about it, without that fundamental shelter. You cannot build anything else on top of it. Like if you do not have housing, you're not educating yourself. You're not looking for opportunities. You're not progressing your goals. So, but it's very complex because there's a lot of municipal and political and policy issues. There's financial sector challenges. There's cost concerns. It's also, you're trying to not price too high. You're trying to create an affordable product and while being profitable. So it's a complex problem and it's worth solving. And if we are successful in solving it, we should get equally rewarded for it.
That makes sense. You've got people like Elon Musk, for example, who are solving some of the most complex problems that we've ever faced, right? So he's building Tesla, he's building the Boring Company, SpaceX. But the reality is not every person is Elon Musk. And you said something interesting, right? So you qualified your answer. You said we should try and solve hard problems, the ones that we're qualified to solve. How do you know which ones you're qualified to solve or not? Because you said earlier that when someone is putting in their complete effort, they're actually just putting in 20%. There's still that 80% that they haven't really utilized.
Listen, we're all not saying, right? We have 5 different fingers, right? We need the whole hand. Different people have different motivation, purpose, ambition, hard work, capacity. I can just speak for myself, which is you should try to solve a problem that's worth solving, the world will recognize you for, and you should time box yourself. And you're going to find out very shortly, is this solvable or not? And if it's not, move on to the next problem. And if it is, try to scale it to as best as you can, and then before you take a pause. So I think it's a process, and not everybody is going to participate and play the game the same way.
It's a tricky one, man, to be honest with you, because I feel like it really depends on the circumstances you come from. And, some of the Pavlism is like what you've seen. Some people have seen too much. And the reality is that the more you've seen, the more the ambition grows to solve a more complex problem. If all you've seen is a farm in Kansas, it's going to be very different than if you've grown up 30, 40 different countries of the world. There should be a genuine desire to maximize one's faculties, skills, experiences, network to solve the biggest problem. Happiness comes from you put your entire blood, sweat, and tears, you push yourself to the max, and you see a growth in yourself. And that's actually, kind of a final thought is that's where it comes down to, like, I love Naval on everything, but it's like, bro, what is the end? It comes a point when you're in midlife, it's like, okay, man, I've done half, I got half to go. And there's this quandary. It's like, yo, why did I do my first half? And I don't know if I know why I did my first half, but I sure definitely need to know why I'm doing my second half. You know what I mean? Because time is now cut in half. And so you get paid in direct proportion to difficult or problem. Man, to be honest, this quote, I don't even know what that means. I just want to be like, dude, what am I doing? And how am I going to attain happiness?
But there's also a combination of like all of the quotes that we went through today, which is if you're working on things that you love, if you surround yourself with people who are high achievers, people that you enjoy spending time with, working with, then maybe sometimes the destination may not be clear, but you'll get there. You may not know where you're going to get to, but you'll get there at the end of the day.
Yeah. Choose bravery over anxiety. It's okay not to know exactly what's going on. I would say the less you know, the more certain you seem to be, So it's actually okay to have open aperture, continuous sort of being reflective, not be constrained by our own identities, add a different Venn diagram, and choose bravery over the anxiety of, I don't know everything yet, but I'm going to choose bravery.
I feel like we started with 15 quotes from Naval and we ended up with a lot of Pavelisms. This could have been 15 quotes from Pavel. Maybe that's what we should call the episode.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.